New Landings Job Chat is brought to you in part by the Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future, and by the EBS Group with an unparalleled background in Oracle solutions and services.
If you run into a difficult situation in an interview, what are some of the tools at your disposal? You'll find out today on Job Chat. My name is HECTOR SILVA, and I'm your host. Our guest today is Kathryn Lorenzen. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Kathryn has recruited, screened, and placed hundreds of people in jobs, coached hundreds of people in their job searches, and made dozens of presentations on career development. She spent the last 14 years at LandaJob Advertising Marketing Talent, and she has also worked for almost 20 years in advertising agency account management at Bernstein Rain, Valentine Redford, and several other creative agencies in the Southeast and Midwest. Kathryn earned her coaching credential from the National Career Development Association, and she served as president of the Kansas City chapter of the Association of Career Professionals International. Her newest hobby is serving as a creativity coach for fiction writers through the Creativity Coaching Association. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thanks, Hector. Glad to be here.
Sounds very interesting, the creativity coaching.
Yes, I love that.
In our previous podcast, we were talking about the different types of difficult situational interviewers. Mm-hmm. Why don't we just take a step back and go through what is a difficult situation and what are those types that we discussed?
Okay, good. The difficult interviewer, you know you're in front of the difficult interviewer when you feel like you're thrown off your game. No matter how much preparation you've done, how well you've prepared, you know about the company, the job, the industry, the people, but you've landed in front of that person who just feels like you are not able to make a connection with, and you just really feel like you're thrown off your game. That's the difficult interview. So I've developed a device of talking about different prototypes of individuals that we might find ourselves in front of. And I can run through those real quick. Please. If you like.
Please do.
So we have talked in our previous two podcasts about these prototypes, including the cold fish, the jaded skeptic, the nosy detective, the self-absorbed stage hog.
My favorite.
The inappropriate legal nightmare, the alien from another planet, and the rose-colored glasses sweetie pie. And these can all be dangerous to us in one way or another, but the goal that we talked about in each case is to build some kind of a connection, some kind of rapport, and to get to the next interview.
What are some of the tools or some of the techniques that we can use in creating this bridge or this connection?
That's great. This is a wonderful topic for our last discussion because these are techniques and tools and tips that we can use no matter who we're in front of. If we begin to feel uncomfortable and we feel like we're sort of losing our grip on the interview, these can be wonderful touchstone techniques to get that connection going again. The goal is always conversation and dialogue. And in fact, all of these things that we're going to talk about and touch on here briefly are techniques that we can use in our everyday lives to build connections with people. We can use them with our children, with our spouses, and with our friends. So they're all useful.
So these are life lessons, not just
these are life skills.
Interview skills.
Yeah,
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Where do we start? Body language?
Let's start with body language because that's a big one. Psychologists have told us for years, and they have demonstrated through study after study, that we communicate the lion's share of what we're getting across to the other person through our body language. Likewise, the messages that we receive are coming mostly from other people's body language. So we're going to be aware of our own body language, but we're also going to be aware of our interviewer's body language. We're always taught that the first few seconds of the interview are the most important, and they are. They definitely are. So the eye contact when we first meet someone, the firmness and friendliness of the handshake, the smile, and the open body language are what create that original connection. There have been several studies that say that you can actually get the job or not get the job in the first 60 seconds based on all those nonverbal considerations. And the person that is making decisions about you is not always aware of the basis on which they're making those decisions. They know they like you or they don't like you. A lot of it is based on body language. So we're always going to try to be open with our body language. We're going to try to avoid the crossed arms and the closed postures. We're going to try to remain open and facing the person that we're with. And a good guideline to try to follow is to literally line up your belly button with the other person's belly button. If you see that the person is beginning to shift away, their body away from you, their trunk, that is an indication that they are not feeling a connection with you. You want to always try to remain as straight face on with them as you can. Likewise, if you feel yourself shifting away, which you can do when you're uncomfortable, notice that and keep your body faced directly toward them. It will try to help maintain that connection. You're always going to try to maintain eye contact as much as possible. When you get uncomfortable, you can drift away, you can begin to look in the corners. Be aware to maintain some eye contact.
We all know that human beings are very visual.
Yes.
So this falls right into that visual spectrum.
Definitely. Sometimes when we are nervous, we'll begin to blink more rapidly. If someone is making us nervous, we'll blink more rapidly. And that then communicates back to the interviewer, you've made me nervous. So try and be aware of that too. This is a lot to monitor, right? We feel like we need a little computer telling us what's going on here. But
on the other hand, as you said, this is not necessarily just a skill that you use in an interview, but you're going to do this in other areas with your family, with your friends, anywhere you go.
Yes.
We normally take our bodies with us wherever we go.
Normally, yes.
So we get to use them
right.
at all times.
Yes. Now, some people will also give you the advice that you need to reflect the body language of your interviewer, so that if they're sitting in a certain posture, that you should mirror that posture. I think you can go overboard with that. It can be noticed and look very affected. But if, for example, your interviewer might be feeling fairly comfortable with you in conversation, that person might sit back in a very relaxed stance. That can be a cue for you that you may also relax your body posture. So you can be aware to reflect it, but not necessarily mirror it literally, or you could be noticed.
Works great if you're in the same room.
Yes.
Now, with all the job interviews that are done by phone these days, we have to then forget about the body and go more towards the voice.
The voice. The voice itself is a very important cue, and obviously if you're on the phone, it's really all you've got to go with. But live, it's important as well. So the variables that we can deal with voice are the pace at which someone is talking. If they're a very fast talker or a very slow talker, you might want to adjust your pace to be more compatible with the way in which they speak. The volume at which they speak. If they happen to be a fairly loud projector and you are a very soft talker, you're going to want to speak up to try to get more to you're going to try to meet them in the middle with their vocal cues.
New Landings Job Chat will be back right after a word from our sponsors.
Hello, my name is William Easley, Managing Director of Wealth Management with Prosperity Advisory Group. While under unemployment stress, there may be a temptation to become more conservative with your investment allocation. Recognizing how short-term problems can adversely influence your thinking about long-term goals can help you avoid costly mistakes. It's reasonable to expect that you may need cash and more liquid assets at your disposal as you assess your financial situation over a job loss. However, you must avoid selling long-term investments as a panic response to uncertainty. You may trigger an unwanted tax or generate an ill-timed loss. Conversely, being unemployed isn't the time to take a flyer on a hot stock tip, ratcheting up your risk level in hopes of a quick profit to make up for lost income. You may do nothing more than compound your cash flow problem. A reasoned and balanced approach is recommended. Start by seeking out a qualified financial planner, such as a CFP professional, who can help you assess your unemployment situation, suggest strategies for conserving wealth, and perhaps help you with ideas on how to best protect assets. It's important to sort out alternatives while structuring a plan around your short-term objectives and your long-term goals. Again, I'm William Easley with Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future.
I may have misspoken. Even though you are on the phone, wouldn't you still, any body language, any movements that you have at your end could still be reflected in your voice, could they not?
No question about it, and I'm glad you brought that up. When we are on the phone, it's important, for example, to smile every once in a while, because we literally can hear it in another person's voice when they are smiling. It can also really help your energy level in a phone interview if you stand up, or at least if you are sitting, to make sure that you are sitting with good posture, with feet on the floor, be in a businesslike posture, because that comes across in your voice.
So even though you're not in the same room, you should still exhibit some of the same body language.
It really helps because those things come through in your voice.
There's another one that you mentioned, another tool or another technique, language cues. What do you mean by language cues?
Language cues are things that come across in the other person's language, literally the words that they use. Sometimes we're taught this in sales training, that a person who is a visual learner will use verbs like look and see. I see what you're saying. We need to look at this. If they're an auditory learner, they might be using words like I hear what you're saying, or I'd like to hear about, rather than a kinesthetic learner who might say I'd like to learn about. We need to talk about this. So you're going to be sometimes alert for those language cues that can give you a window into how to respond to that person.
And as with body language, where you might, in some form, mirror the person, you also want to use those same type of words yourself.
Yes, and it requires a little bit of practice. This is where you can really practice on kind of your spouse and your kids and your friends to be alert for some of those language cues for what are the preferences, what are the learning preferences of that person, what kind of verbs do they use, and practice mirroring that.
You also mentioned that name has as a tool or a technique. What do you mean by name?
Literally, the magic of using someone's name creates a connection. So when we're talking, when I say your name, Hector, it immediately, you when you hear someone say your name, it sort of jolts you into the present moment. We can overdo that It can be sort of an artificial intimacy by overusing the person's name. But it can be a very warming tool in a conversation to literally call the person by name every once in a while.
It can also get very annoying if you keep saying it over and over.
Yes, yes,
Like
it definitely
mommy,
can.
Mommy, 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 mommy.
Yes, yes,
Silence as a tool.
yes. Don't be afraid of silence. A lot of people rush to fill every single pause in a conversation. It can be very useful every once in a while to just let the end of the sentence sit there for a moment.
The dramatic pause.
Well, sometimes in an interview, people just need time to process.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is a brief silence, don't rush to fill it. Just let it sit for a moment, be comfortable, and then introduce a new topic or a question or something to further the exchange.
In most natural conversations, there is silence.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do try to fill it, it makes it artificial.
It can. It can, yes. Okay. The most important thing is not to rush to fill it. Don't be afraid of silence. Don't panic. Remind yourself it's not an emergency if there's a brief pause in the conversation.
Okay. What about etiquette? How important is that in an interview?
Etiquette is extremely important. And it is, of course, you hear from people all the time that manners are kind of a lost art. The power of the thank you note is, of course, not to be underestimated. And in an organization like this, where we're concerned with job search and job transition, we always are reminding ourselves and one another to thank everyone who helps you in your process. But the thank you note has a particular kind of power. And however genuine you can be in your thank you note and however specific to not just be boilerplate can really go a long way toward cementing that connection with a person. And the immediacy of a thank you note, I think, frankly, that's why email has begun to overtake written thank you notes, because of the immediacy of it, because the pace at which we're moving is so quick that if someone can be thanked in the same day, that is really helpful. But I also encourage people to follow up with a written thank you note in addition to the email thank you note.
It's much more personable.
Yes, no question about it.
Questions. Mm-hmm. Are there any specific questions you should stay away from?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I'm going to add one more thing to the subject of etiquette. Okay. That is probably the most common difficulty that I encounter when preparing people for interviews. And that is the golden rule of interviewing, of being interviewed, which is do not interrupt. The pace at which our culture is moving and the amount of media shows that we're exposed to where people are they're not in dialogue anymore, they're in shouting matches. Unfortunately, we all kind of absorb some of that by osmosis. And the most common thing that I have to coach people out of is interrupting. So be aware of that phenomenon, no matter how badly you want to get a point in. Pull yourself back, wait for an opening, ask a question, do not interrupt.
That goes back to a word that we used with a number of these prototypes before, and that's patience.
Yes.
So you have to be patient, be aware of when it is that you can ask that question, take your time, don't
Listen.
rush the interviewer.
Yeah.
Let them set the pace.
Exactly. Yes.
And one other technique which I think is very important is breathing. Mm-hmm. Breathing is not overrated.
Not only is it required, it's a very important tool in the interview process, because when we get tense, when we get nervous, our breathing becomes very shallow and it gets all up here in the shoulders, and you can even be aware of maybe holding your shoulders very high. So I like to remind people before they physically go into the interview space to take a few deep breaths, and really deep diaphragm breaths, and make sure that you are exhaling as much as you are inhaling. When you are in that difficult interviewer situation, remind yourself to breathe deeply and not to breathe shallowly and quickly, because the more breath you have, literally, the more oxygen is going to your brain. Your brain needs an enormous amount of glucose. It burns through a huge amount of energy in going through an interview, and it needs that oxygen. It needs the deep breath. You'll stay on your game better if you breathe deeply.
You naturally have a change in your breathing patterns just from being nervous going in.
No question.
So you're saying take care of that before you go in, and relax yourself and control yourself before you go in there.
Yes. Set the stage before you go in the room with a few deep breaths.
Breathing on the phone.
Yes.
That could be very disconcerting if you don't do it right.
Yes. And I even have to remind people when they're getting ready for a phone interview, don't drink anything. If you're going to have your water or your coffee nearby, don't partake of that when you're in the interview, because people don't want to hear your bodily function noises, even like swallowing. Your breathing on the phone is not such a big deal unless you know that you have a breathing problem. If you're an asthmatic or you have COPD or something that is really an issue, then make sure that you are sort of tilting your phone away when you're breathing. But otherwise, normal breathing on the phone is not a problem.
I was thinking also in terms of people that use headsets.
Oh, yes. When you have it too close.
Too close to the mouth, and you can hear every breath that they're taking. And
you can prepare for that in advance if you like. If you want to see what you sound like on a headset, have a friend or someone that you've worked with before that can give you a professional opinion tell you how you sound on your headset.
We've run through quite a number of behavioral and psychological tools today, and we've we've discussed a number of prototypes in the past shows. All of these work together, don't they?
Definitely.
Yeah. Practice, I imagine, becomes very important with all of this. When you say be prepared, you're going to prepare, of course, for the interview and have all of your ducks in a row as far as your experience and your knowledge and everything else. But I hear you saying, be prepared when you walk into that room to see one of these types of individuals, and then be prepared with the tools to overcome that.
Exactly. These tools can help us overcome the unexpected situations that will arise when we land in front of these difficult interviewer prototypes.
Well, I am glad you landed here with us.
My pleasure.
If someone wanted to contact you to get some more information or to talk about any specific issues, where could they reach you?
I can be located at the company that I work with, www.LandaJobNow.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Kathryn Lorenzen, Lorenzen, and it's been my pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure to have you. And make sure that you go and see the other programs that we've done with Kathryn so you can get the full scope of what we have discussed. And remember that those, plus all other job chats, are available on our website, www.newlandingsjobchat.org. And if you click on the previous job chats or the previous chats button, you'll be able to hear all of our previous shows. And until next time, I hope that your days are full of health, happiness, and success.